This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Concrete Jungle, Part 1. Q drove through Dallas traffic to meet his real estate agent so that he could make final selections for the house that he's building in Dallas, Texas. His brand new house is on schedule to be completed in 8 to 10 months, just like he was quoted about 6 months ago. When he first showed up on his parents' doorstep in Fort Worth, Texas 2 years ago, he wasn't 100% sure if Texas was going to be his home. While he loved Brooklyn, his hometown, he wasn't sure that he wanted to go back to the concrete jungle. It wasn't about running from his past, but like his grandparents who moved to America from Trinidad and Tobago, his goal is to establish roots in a place where he can find a wife and raise a family. 22 years ago, at the age of 17, when he was recruited to North Carolina A&T on both a track and academic scholarship, Q was introduced to a whole new world. He grew to love the slower pace of the South, the genteel nature of the Southern belles, and the way that his up-top swag affected them. Now, don't get me wrong, he loved the hustle, the grit, the lingo, the passion, the fire of women from New York. After all, his mother, Bella St. James, was born and raised in New York. While Bella's roots are Caribbean, just like Q's father's, Bella is New Yiddy through and through. Quincy's father, Quincy Anders St. James III, affectionately known by his middle name Anders and called Andy by his close family and friends, found a woman after his own heart, settled down, and stuck beside her. And that was Q's goal. Q's desire was always to help people and find a woman with his mother's heart and hustle who would love God, take care of her family, and be loyal to him. Q thought he found that when he met Amora Thomas. When he walked into his first college party and she laughed right on cue, Q was mesmerized. Drawn in by her big, beautiful smile, his attention was quickly captivated by her strapless crop top wrapped around some double D's, her Daisy Dukes sitting just right on her wide hips and full round bottom, and her espadrilles tied up her shapely calves, pointing to her muscular but feminine thighs. But what took his breath away was her natural beauty. She was butter pecan brown, just like his mother, dressed in an ear-to-ear smile with beautiful full lips and a full Afrocentric nose, almond-shaped eyes, colored a beautiful shade of brown. And she was wearing her shoulder-length natural hair pinned up with a few perfectly placed, beautifully coiled ringlets left out. It was the late 90s, a time when most black women were stuck on that creamy crack, rocking their Dominican blowouts and doobies. So seeing a sister embracing her natural hair in its natural state at that time was a breath of fresh air for Q. There was only one problem. She was directing all that fine feminine black energy towards another brother. Some corny looking frat dude had the best view in the house. And he had home court advantage, seeing as how the party was his frat's party. His frat threw the first college party of the year every year because they were the men to know at A&T. Q was a loner back then, but if it wasn't for his scholarship and his desire to get to know Amora better, he would have never even considered a fraternity. Needing to complete community service hours in order to maintain his scholarship, and in an effort to get to know Amora better, Q attended a fireside chat hosted by that fraternity later in the semester, and the rest is blue and white history. As Q pulled up outside the Crafts Homes builder's office, he sent a text to check in with his counterpart over at TCO, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, where he's been working for the past 2 years. Shortly after arriving in Texas, he gave himself a little bit of time to get his bearings and figure out exactly what it was that he wanted to do. Then he reinstated his basic law enforcement training license and renewed his law enforcement training certification. Within 3 months, he was hired by TCO as a senior in-service training instructor, meaning he provides training to current law enforcement across the state and training for instructors at the various police departments. He was able to secure this job because of his extensive experience in forensic investigations and personal security. In addition, he had glowing references from two of his past co-workers and good friends, Captain Roderick Arrington and Lawrence Johnson, better known as LJ. Q met now Captain Arrington when he was a sergeant for North Carolina Police Department while Q was in college. The police department sent then Sergeant Arrington to all of the HBCUs in the local area to recruit so that they could increase the diversity of their police forces. He sought out the best, the brightest, and the most fit, and where else to look than the track team. Arrington made it his business to establish relationships with up and coming students who had the grades, comparable majors, and demonstrated athletic prowess. And of course, Q fit the bill. It didn't take long at all for Arrington to become Q's mentor, and shortly before Q graduated, he was recruited to the police department that Arrington worked for. 2 years later, Sergeant Arrington became Lieutenant Arrington, and Officer Q became Patrol Training Officer Q. Arrington and Q went on that same HBCU tour looking for new recruits. They found LJ at Clark Atlanta University, a Dean's List football star with 2 semesters left to graduate from the same city where Arrington and LJ worked for the police department. He was the perfect candidate. After graduation, LJ was hired on at the police department, Q became his patrol training officer, and Arrington became both of their supervisors. Together, they worked their way up the ranks through patrol, special investigations, and eventually to the roles of officer and sergeant in the domestic violence unit. Q just shook his head, thinking about how quickly everything that seemed so right can go so wrong. Looking at the date on his watch, he realized that 8 years ago to the day, Amora was supposed to be having the wedding of her dreams, and she was supposed to be the wife of his. Captain Arrington was set to be his best man, and LJ was set to be one of his 3 groomsmen. Instead, the day before, he lost his job, 2 of the most important women in his lives, and 1 of his closest friends. Q shook himself off of memory lane and back onto Now Street, parked in the parking lot, verified that all was well on the job front, locked the truck, and walked into the builder's office. As he walked in, he reminded himself that he was following God's plan. God told him to build the house, and the wife would come. When he walked inside, the new agent was waiting for him. Her back was turned, and from that angle, she looked like she could be a candidate. Curly auburn hair flowing down to her mid-back. He wasn't sure if it was hers or purchased, but it was lovely. Wearing a tan 3/4 length blouse tucked into a tailored A-line cocoa-colored miniskirt with her 5'5" petite package, perfectly stacked, and some 4-inch crocodile pumps, Veronica Mills was absolutely something to see. The agent turned around, and Q was looking into the most captivating green eyes he'd ever seen on a black woman. While her skin tone was a little lighter than his preference, and her weight was a little lighter than his preference, Q absolutely does not discriminate against his sisters. He knows that black women come in all shapes, all sizes, and all hues, and he loves every bit of it. The agent looked him in the eyes and said, "Hello, Mr. St. James. I'm Veronica Mills. I'll be assisting you today. I'm helping Tracy close out a few of her sales while she's on maternity leave, so I'll be at your disposal for the next 4 months. While she'll still be available remotely, I'll be the one you see anytime you need to come into the office." The 2 shook hands, and Q said, "It's nice to meet you, Miss Mills. I'm sure you're a busy man, so my plan is to not have you here long. We try to have our clients come in towards the end of their build to make their final selections on things like cabinets and floors and countertops. This allows them to have access to the best selections, the newest options, and the best pricing. Our preference is that we have you come into the office because doing this virtually just doesn't suffice. It's easier to ensure that the combinations will meet your standards. Now, Will your wife be joining us? Veronica said, I'm not married. Fiance, girlfriend, baby mama. I'm a single man, Miss Mills. And if I had children with a woman, married or otherwise, I'd never refer to her as a baby mama, said Q. Understood? And please, call me Veronica. Q nodded his head, and Veronica pointed him to the area where the selections needed to be made. After making his selections, Q turned to Veronica and said, Are we done here? Veronica said, Yes. Listen, I'm sorry. I feel like I may have offended you. That was definitely not my intention. Q said, No offense taken. I'm Trini. We're fiercely protective of our women, even the hypothetical ones. Q and Veronica laughed, and she said, Yeah, I've heard that about Caribbean men. As a matter of fact, that's not all I've heard, Veronica said in a very suggestive tone. After a long pause, Q said, Well, seeing is believing. Are you single, Miss Mills? Veronica said quickly, Yes, I am. Q chuckled and said, Well, call me sometime. And when you do, call me Q.